Good day, guys. Welcome to another session. This is Python 301. That's Python for Backend Web Developers. Today is going to be all stories or theories, and I believe this is very important for you to understand how things work. This is going to be very, very important. So there's a couple of topics we'll be talking through, and we'd like you guys to, acquaint yourself with the nomenclature, the words, the terminology, because you'll be coming across it, when you start doing all these things you are doing. So let's get into it. Now, today's class is going to be understanding RESTful APIs. It's going to be understanding RESTful APIs. The question is, what is an API? We're going to handle RESTful later, one after the other. So can you please mute your session from there so that we can have a clean reception? So an API is short form for Application Programming Interface, API. That's still a lot of mouthful, but it's something that you need to know the meaning. Application Programming Interface. Ability for you to interface with a software, a piece of technology. So API gives you the access to interface with a technology. So let's say, for example, you have a car, right? Imagine, how can you interface with a car? How can a system that you have developed interface with a car? It uses the terminology called API, to interface with it. API is generic, can be used anyhow. Something that starts in the middle that allows you to gain access to the other party's technology is what I call API. It allows different softwares, application to communicate with each other, right? So that's it. That's what API stands for. Then we'll go for the, next. I'll put a definition out there like so that we can have a review of the whole thing. Then we go to the next important part. What is, I won't define RESTful on its own. I will just tackle the term RESTful API together. What's RESTful API? So you ask yourself, the REST is an acronym, or it's a short for representational state transfer. Representational state transfer. That's what that means. We already defined what an API means. So let's go ahead and continue our definition. It's an architectural style for designing networked application. A RESTful API follows a REST principle to expose resources that can be accessed via standard HTTP protocol or HTTP method. So let me try and break that down a little bit. We already defined what an API means. Means that there are systems everywhere. So API allows anybody to be able to, of course with the right access, to be able to connect with other systems. I made use example of a car, right? You have your brain box, you have all these other all these components in the car, so an API allows you to be able to interface with that car, right? So a RESTful API is a method. RESTful is a method for doing that connectivity to the car. It's one of the methods. There are vast array of methods. This is just one method. So, and this method says that it uses network technology and using HTTP request method. We are going to get into HTTP request. So you can see that we are saying more and more and more. I'm going to put a definition here, and then we go to the next things there. And that is what makes RESTful API kind of different from every other method. I won't define other method. I will just talk about the features of RESTful API. What make RESTful API kind of stand out? And one of the things is that it is stateless. Stateless means that anybody can make that request without prior knowledge of, have you made that request before? Have you made a request before? So let me try and break it down a little bit. I will still use the car as an example. You are trying to access information from a car, like you want to check the mileage of a car. Hope you know that there are interfaces that allows you to communicate with information of a vehicle. You want to know the information of a vehicle. There are programs that you can use to interface with that. I think there's something called OBD2 or something, where you block in via Bluetooth and then you can connect to the memory of the system. That's an interface. That's also an API on a very low level. So this method of using REST API requires internet or network from the definition, right? Network communication, not through Bluetooth or anything. It has to use network connection. And one of the key features is that it's stateless. When you are trying to get information from it, you can send as much information as you want, and then you get, the information you need. It doesn't require that you send one information first before you send the other one. You can send what you need and you get all the information at once. So each request that you're sending to the car contains all the necessary information that it needs to do whatever it needs to do. Let me give you another information. Let's say you want to get your bank details. You will agree with me that if you want to get your bank details, there are procedures that you need to do. Number one procedure is you need to log in. Number two procedure is you might need to go to, check balance. And final procedure is your balance, being reviewed to you. That's like different levels. But when you're using a REST API, you can actually combine all these three levels to one. You send one request, check balance, and that's your request you're using to check balance already contains all the information for the check balance to work. So that's one of the, benefits of using REST API. So I'll call this stateless. So this is titled under key characteristics of REST API. Okay, so let's go on and tackle other things. I want to make this a future. Yes. So that's under this subtitle, under this, and this is a point. So moving on, the next point is catchable. What is the meaning of catchable? Catchable means, when you are doing things over the network. Remember, everything we are doing is based on the fact that it's network based, right? We're on the web, so everything that web has to offer applies to this. A cache or cached means that it's saved in memory. Something is saved in memory. When you are making a request from the client side is you trying to request for a resource or resources. You log into your banking application, you are requesting that it gives you access to the interface. Caching means that it doesn't need to go to the backend to do that round trip. The process of you leaving your phone, like to say login, and then going to the server to authenticate that information, that's a round trip. That's like a long distance and waste of time. REST API has the ability to catch requests. Instead of me going to check my balance every time, the first time I went to go and check the balance, I can keep it somewhere and then don't have to do it, more frequently. So REST API has the ability to catch your requests. So the response can be cached to improve performance. Then we have, I'll just stop at those two features. I don't want to load the features too much. So let's move on to the next thing, and that is understanding endpoints and HTTP methods. We did mention HTTP method here, but we didn't deliberate more about it, right? So we're gonna start giving it more light now. We want to explain what HTTP method is all about. So before we go into that, we have a subtopic, which is we're going to address it inside here, obviously. And this part here will be understanding API endpoints and HTTP requests. They are together. So what are endpoints? Endpoint is an extract of a URI. I'm sure you guys have heard URL before, Universal Resource Locator, but there's another one well, not like another one. The main thing that is called is URI, which is uniform. That's not universal, by the way. It's supposed to be uniform resource location. Then the URI is called uniform resource identifier, and that is the major thing. It's from it you draw out the URL and endpoint and what have you. So I'm going to give example of what I mean so that you see this one is visual. An example of a URL which is very, very common. Let me just say HTTP and let's say API dot example.com / user account 1, right? So this is a full, URI. It's and from a URI you can be able to identify your endpoints. So what's endpoint from here? Endpoint starts from where your domain kind of if you look at this, you can identify that this is a domain. This is a domain name. From here, you know that this is a subdomain. So let me start bringing out some stuff. So here you have a domain. The domain name is example.com. Then you have subdomain. So subdomain exists within the domain. The subdomain is actually this info. I'm leaving out the HTTP. That is a protocol. I'm leaving that out. Then the next thing you have is the endpoint. So maybe when I list it like this, you can then see it, because I'm kind of struggling with the definition. So the endpoint starts after the domain has you finished with the domain here. Then you have the endpoint, right? That's where you look at it as the endpoint. Then we have another thing again called base URL. It can either be called base URL or it's majorly it's called base URL. The base URL it's more of like a domain, but is before it ends. Where it ends is where the endpoints continue. So the base URL is the same thing as what we have here, but you don't call it as a subdomain. I will explain why. So let's go ahead and still call this a base URL. So let me now assume that this address is different, or this full URL is different, and say for some reason the person that designed this wanted to create different versioning for its API, and say this is API version 1, and this version, it means we can have other versions. Then I can have API version 2, like so. So if you see these are the same API but having different versions, right? Maybe in this version we implement something, in this version we implement another thing. So let me now redesign this again. The domain still remains example.com. The subdomain remains app.example.com. The endpoint, you will see now the endpoint has changed. It doesn't change, sorry. The endpoint is still this, but you notice that it's not starting from .com again. Now the base URL is what will change. The base URL is what is common to all the APIs, because for now we are calling only one API. It's possible that I want to do another thing. I want to be able to do maybe delete user or something, or check other thing. Let's say withdraw, or let's say deposit, right? I want to do this. So you can see that the endpoint is changing, but the base URL is fixed. So you should be able to understand what this nomenclature are all about: domain, subdomain, endpoint, base, URL. Okay, so I'll move on to the next thing, which is talking about the HTTP method in REST API. What we just talked about is trying to bring out what API endpoint is all about. And you will hear me in our previous class I talk about endpoints. So now you can start seeing the endpoints from here. So most times your base URL is fixed. Once you set it, then you can just be passing what is the important thing. because this is where you go and start, navigating through the URI to know which resources you want to consume for your project. So let's look at the method. API uses HTTP method to perform actions. So I'm going to write that down so that you see. So HTTP methods uses so that is what this is all about. API uses HTTP methods to perform action on resources. So what kind of action can they perform? There are several actions you can perform on a particular resource or a particular end, and those actions are fixed, kind of. There are just few of them, and for the course of this throughout this course we will be actually using 2 or 3 of them. They are quite a handful, but we will not be exploring too much of them because most of them you can use them repetitively. You don't have to explore all the other options. It's just when you are trying to be picky you might then need to worry about the other ones. So we have methods, we have the action you can perform on top of them, then you have example to see how it looks like. And I hope this guy will help me with this. Okay, I think he's helping me out with it. I wanted to build a table, so let's build another thing here. So what I want to do here is start listing the method we have. We have a get method. Majorly, get allows you to get resources from the backend. If you want to get resources, example again is getting your bank statements, right? You are trying to get something from the backend. The API wants to fetch information, so they call it like you want to retrieve information. So you want to retrieve data. Receive data from the backend. And how does the URI or the endpoint looks like? So example endpoint. How does the endpoint look like? The endpoint can be anything, so to say, but most times also note that your endpoint should be making sense to you. When anybody sees an endpoint, it should just make sense. So if I want to get data, I can say maybe for account balance, I can say for a user, the user is user ID 1, and what do I want to get? I can say balance. So this is kind of making sense. If you see this, oh, I want to get user balance for 1, and this can be rewritten as many as in a different form as possible. The idea is that it should just try and convey the information you are trying to retrieve. Let's rewrite this another way. You can say balance user 1, right? There are various school of thought that talks about which should come first, but the idea is that you want to get the balance of a user. What's the user ID is 1. That's the idea. So it means if you want to get the user ID of the 4th person, not the 4th person, of the user ID 4, you will go like so. So this endpoint will always give you the resource of the balance of this user. That's what is happening here. So I think it's better like so. So let's move on to the next thing. So this is just for getting, which is one method. There are several methods like I mentioned. Next method is to post. Post is to send or create a resource. So I'm using the real definition now. So create a new resources. So you ask me, what do you mean by create new resources? So I'll give you an example. If you want to create, let me see the example I'm going to use. Let's say you have an e-commerce website or you want to shop on a platform, and in fact, let's not go too far. Let's say you want to register an app, you want to register on a platform to do something. Let's even still use the e-commerce website. You want to register to be able to use the facility for an e-commerce application. The process of you registering is that you are creating a resources that does not exist. As a user, you are going to be creating the stuff that does not exist. So your profile does not exist on their platform or on the database, and the process of posting depicts creation. So to do that is going to be, let's say, user/new. This can be a thing. So it can be like this, user/new. And mind you, when you are sending this request, we're not doing any code now. There's no code here. This is what you need to have a mindset about, because by the time you now start seeing code and you are seeing us use post or use get, you will know the reason why we're using post. We're using post because we want to create a resources. We're using get because we want to retrieve resources. So you need to first understand that when you're making any request, what you want to use it for matters before you know the kind of method to pass across. Okay, so we have that users create. You can say users new, or you can just say users. Anyhow, as long as you make sure that you are posting the right thing. And again, your endpoint cannot be the same across port. Your endpoint and your method, you can't have duplicates of them. They must be unique. So you can use this one to say you want to get all users. Okay, let me show you another one. For example, you can say get again, but the action is still retrieving. But in this case, what is happening is that you are retrieving all the users. This line 37 retrieves all users. But this one, for example, you are creating into the user directory or into the user database. Is different from this one because this one carries a post flag, while this one carries a get flag. But of course, you can do something like this to and say create, right? But most times is always like this, most times. So you can decide on how you want to design your endpoint. It's totally left to you. This endpoint here does not make any meaning to what is going on. This is you trying to document your own application to make sense to you. But there are best practices and there are norms, that you can use so that everybody understand what it is you are trying to do. Okay, so you don't just create something out of the blue. So most times it's like this. Once you want to create new users, you just say users, the post will post into the user directory. Okay, the next one that follows, I've repeated something here, but it's fine. So this is still 1, this is 2. The next thing that follows is put. Put most times is used to update. This is where the debate comes, like, should you use put or post? Most times you will just have to use post for everything for now, for your level. When you want to create or update your resources, just use post. So put is used for partially updating a resource that is already available. So I will just say updating a resource. An example of that can be, maybe you are trying to update your profile. You've already created the account, and then maybe you want to update your profile, want to change your password or something. So anything updating, this can be, used for it. So when you're trying to update your profile, you will do the user. You are the user 1, maybe you are the first user or user 3 or something. So you're updating your account by passing these endpoints. Notice you're also putting puts. So even though if you have an one that's a post with this, you still differently. Then we have another one that's also, looks like put, and that one is called patch. Patch and put, they are relatively not the same, but relatively the same. That's why I said this part we're entering now is a little bit tight, like they are closely related. So most times you just stick with post and get. That's what we'll be working with. In fact, 3 things we'll be working with: post, get, and delete. We're still going to talk about delete. So this is technically also updating updating of your resources, and you can still use the same section here, say user /1. But these are treated differently because this is sending a post, this one is sending a put method, this one is sending a patch method, so they are not duplicates. These are two different things, even though they mean the same thing. They are two different things. So a school of thought can say this is for replacing, this is for updating. So this one is more of like replacing a resource, while this one is updating a resource. So nomenclature. Moving on to the last one, second to the last one, we have delete. Obviously this is removing a resources, so yeah, removing a resources or deleting something. And that can be, you can also use the same endpoint. So you can see that all these endpoints are looking similar, but they are going to be performed in a, they're going to perform different operation. By the time you see the code, you will get to understand what is happening once the code comes out. Finally, we have options, which you will never use. You will never use options. So options is used internally by the app, and option just checks, what is allowed. So it just checks allowed method. So this is not going to be used by your own self. The system just check what is allowed for a particular endpoint. So I won't be talking about options. We'll just stop here, and I will checklist the ones that we'll be using so that you have an idea of what you're expecting. So there is this one. We'll be using this one. Where do I put that? So we'll be using this. So this is get. Let me remove one of the gets so it won't make it look much. We'll be using this one most of the time. This is what we'll be using, and just for demonstration, we might use patch just to demonstrate the difference. So we won't be using puts. I use more of get, post, patch, delete. But most times for starters, you can just focus on get, post, delete, and you are good to go. You are good to go with all this one. So let's move on to the next thing that we have on the course outline, the topic. So, and that's the last thing we have for today, because like I mentioned to you guys, everything we are doing today is just theory based. The final thing is to install Flask. Flask is the library we're going to be using to do our RESTful API using Python. And by now, I'm sure everybody has Flask installed. To install Flask is as simple as using your pip. Pip is the Python package manager, and you will do pip install Flask. There are different kind of installation that you have already in Python, and I did mention when we were doing Python for beginners that Python has several installation, or rather different versions. So if yours come with 2.0 and you install 3.0, there is going to be a little bit of issues trying to install pip, or pip might have been installed with a different name. So most times it's pip like this, or pip3 install Flask. So for my own case, mine was requiring some very funny methodology. But let me see, this is a new installation of a system that I have. Let me try and install Flask and see what are the requirements that it's asking me. And whatever you see here is the same thing that you might get, not really the same thing. Let me even see the Python I have installed. So I can say Python to see. In fact, Python is not installed on my system. I doubt that. So let me do Py3. Let me now do Python 3. So Python 3 is on my system. So you can see what I was trying to explain to you guys. So depending on your system, you might have different kind of installation. Python comes in pre-installed on most of the systems, so you can check. And we also have a way for you to run multiple Pythons on your system. For some reason, I'm running Python 3.13, which is close to the latest. So so most times you have your PIP installed already, or you might also need to install PIP separately with the system. Let me see what I have here. So if I do PIP3, I have it installed as PIP3. So I run PIP3, it brought out these options. These are things. This is the package manager for Python. So if I do PIP, obviously it's not going to work. Mine comes with PIP. The reason why I'm explaining all this is because yours might be PIP or PIP3, right? So that in case if you try one, it doesn't work, you have to try the other one. So I have PIP install Flask. Mine doesn't also work directly installing like this, but let me see if it works. Yeah, it doesn't work directly off the shelf like so. So you might also fix this, and it's giving me some option to either install PIPX, and the idea of PIPX is to like an alternative. So I might end up installing PIPX so that I can have an easy way around this. But let's see if we can, resolve it right now. A new release of PIP is available. I'm not worried about that. To update, I don't want to do that now. So if you wish to install Python library that isn't in Homebrew, use virtual environment. Okay. So all this setup, I'm not interested in using all this setup. So if you wish to install a Python application that isn't in Homebrew, it may be easier for you to use PIPX install this. So let's try and use PIPX. So I think it's another PIP management, package management tool. So in case if you struggle with this, you can try and use PIPX. And one of the way for me to use PIP3 by force is to, use this flag so that it forces its way in, and that's what I've been using most of the time. But now let me try this PIPX and see if it's gonna be better than me forcing myself to have a special flag turned on every time I want to do, install a package or a library in Python. So let's see how that goes. And I have that almost done. Okay, PIPX is installed. Let's try if PIPX will work for me. So I have PIPX installed. I just want to write it out there as one of the options that you can try. And I will also list this option that allows you to break out from the shackles of this error that I normally get. So you can use this method as well. So this method is what I normally use because Python is not my default. I don't use Python almost every day, so I just go ahead and use this. So let's try this, if this will work out of the box, if that will solve my problem that I normally have. So it's working, guys. So that is working naturally. You can see that it's upgrading and it's installing Flask. Flask is already installing, and there we go. We have note that it's not been, I think everything is working well from this. Installed package Flask 3.1 installed using Python. This the app are now globally available, so Flask is available globally. So that's it, guys. We are done for today's class. So what I will ask you to do is that to go and check out all this, make sure you understand all the things we've covered today, and go and install Flask. Make sure that you install Flask. It's very important. If you can't install it, it really affects what we're about to do next, because we're going to be depending heavily on Flask. Let's see if we can pull one of the an app up. So let me run our first Flask app. Let me see if we can pull that py. So I just created something now. This doesn't need to show for now. So let me see if you recognize that we have Flask in there. I can see that underline. That means something. It's not saying the Flask, but let me just continue. Okay, now that underline has gone away, so which is a good news. So just on the file, the the underline has come back again, but let's go ahead. and continue. I'm not going to explain any of this code, and the idea is that we just want to test to see that the Python class, the Flask is installed. So our next class, we're going to use it to explain what we are doing here. So we have our route. But okay, I will just explain as little as I can explain. This part means that these are our endpoints. This is where you denote your endpoints, and this should be, what you are saying is that should just be the starting point of your app. Of course, you can put every other thing here. This is where you can specify that user thing we were talking about, user slash whatever thing you want to do. But in this case, we've not started building anything, so we don't need to start doing any reference also. So we want to return some data and saying message hello world. Then I don't know if you guys remember this one in Python. So I will explain it in our next class. So we can then say app.run. By default, if you did not specify, you can specify the end. You can see that we didn't specify if wanted to do get or anything. In the next class, we are going to be looking into all those things in the next class. So we have our Python app, but let me see why it's giving us a fuss about this. It's not giving me any story, cannot be resolved. So I hope this will not have issue when we are trying to run the app, because it has already given us a sign there. Again, when you want to run your Python app, you can use Python 3. I think Python 3 is what my system recognizes, and then I do my app.py, which should be home and running home and dry. Yes, I knew that was gonna give us issue. I knew it. So Flask might not have been installed globally, but let me see if I can find another way around it. No module. I knew that was gonna come for us. So in order not to waste time, I will just pick the method I normally use to install my Flask, and which is to do this. This is how I normally install my Flask. I just come in here and run this guy. So it just does the thing for me, right? So what that does is to force it to install, and I think is okay. If you look at it now, it shouldn't give you that underline anymore. So this is for my system, and that's why I listed all the methods out here for you guys, so that depending on where you find yourself, unfortunately PIPX is not working for me. So this is what I normally do, and then I execute it. So let's give it a try and see if Python is working now. So I do Python 3. By the way, I have a shortcut key that you can press. You can just use this play button, and then it will run the code for you, but I just wanted to do it manually so that we see how it's going, since it's our first time in this class. Then we do app.py, and our server is running. We have this, it says allow Python to find devices on local network. Cool. Okay, so this is a development. The reason for this is because we said the bug is true, and that's great. What that means is now that anybody that hits these endpoints, you will be able to serve them this information. Of course, let's give it a try. Let's not take his word for it. Let's see what happens if we try that. We have a starter guy here. I think this can sit right here, and the endpoint is 5,000. Okay guys, you can see, so what you are sending here is what you have here is this. That's your first REST API we just called. In the next class, we're going to be doing more. So for me to, let me try and show you one thing I just saw now. Maybe it will help you. Notice what is happening here. This is the console log of what is happening, when you are trying to consume the endpoints. This is somebody else calling the endpoints, by the way. You are serving as the client and as the server side. So when you try to consume the endpoint, this is the request that is sent. Notice what happened here. It's saying that it's getting a get HTTP request. That's why you have it like this, get HTTP. And if you have post, it will also say post HTTP. And by the way, in the next class, we're still going to do a little bit theory, not too much theory, when we talk about the status code. So you can see 200 here. So get is the HTTP method. This is the protocol, which is HTTP, and this is the response that is being returned from the server. The response is 200. There are several response when you try to do stuff with the server. Just to show you what I mean by response. If you do this, look at what happened. You got another thing here. So this is get. This is HTTP requests. This is HTTP requests, but this is 200 here. In this case, it is 400. We'll address, that later. That is a status request or status feedback from the server. So the endpoint you are trying to access is not available, and that's why it's giving you that error. Okay, guys, I think that's all for tonight. That is all for tonight. This is where I take questions, guys. Questions, if you have any. Questions. So with the absence of no question, we push the class to the next. The next class is next week, Wednesday. Same time. Next week, Wednesday, same time.
So